A millionaire humiliated his fiancée at their engagement party. What happened next shocked everyone. Red wine splashed across Tiana's white engagement gown as 300 guests watched in stunned silence, and her fiancé Brandon just stood there, smiling like he'd planned it. The crowd's nervous laughter turned to gasps when she locked eyes with him, turned without a word, and walked away from the millionaire who thought humiliating her would make him powerful. But what she did next didn't just shock everyone at that party. It destroyed the man who thought he owned her. If you're ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get into the story. They said the wine was an accident, that he didn't mean it, that she was overreacting. Those were the whispers racing through the manicured gardens of the Whitaker estate as Tiana Douglas stood frozen in the center of the grand lawn, red wine dripping down the bodice of her white engagement gown. The stain spread like blood across silk, darkening with every second that passed. The crowd, tuxedos and diamonds, old money and older cruelty, watched in stunned silence before the first nervous laugh broke through. Then another. And another. Did you see her face? Someone whispered behind a champagne flute. Brandon always did have a wicked sense of humor, another replied, barely concealing a smirk. Tiana's hands trembled at her sides. She could feel their eyes on her. Every guest, every society columnist, every person who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of her future. Instead, they were witnessing her humiliation. Some had their phones out recording. Others exchanged knowing glances. A few looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Brandon stood beside her, glass still raised, his grin sharp and unapologetic. "Relax, darling," he said loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It's just wine. You're making a scene." She wasn't making the scene. He was. And everyone knew it. Tiana took a breath, trying to steady herself, trying to remember who she was before this moment. But all she could hear was the laughter. All she could feel was the cold, sticky fabric clinging to her skin and the weight of 100 judgments pressing down on her shoulders. She wanted to run, to vanish, to rewind the last 10 minutes and refuse to stand on that stage beside him. But her feet wouldn't move. Not yet. Mrs. Whitaker-to-be doesn't look so thrilled anymore, someone murmured from the crowd. Can you blame her? That was brutal. She should have known what she was getting into. Brandon Whitaker doesn't do humble. The voices swirled around her, cutting deeper than the wine ever could. She forced her chin up, forced her lips into something resembling composure, and took one step. Then another. Away from Brandon. Away from the crowd. Toward the shadowed entrance of the manor where the fairy lights didn't quite reach. The applause for Brandon's toast finally died down, replaced by an awkward hum of conversation. The party tried to restart itself, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen it. Everyone would remember. As Tiana disappeared through the glass doors, one person remained still, watching from the edge of the hedge-lined pathway. Andrew Mercer. Older. Quieter. Not laughing. Just watching. Inside the manor, Tiana caught her reflection in the gilded hallway mirror. The gown that had made her feel like a bride now made her feel like a fool. She stared at herself, at the woman who had believed Brandon Whitaker when he said he loved her, when he promised partnership, when he whispered that she was enough. She had never been enough. Not for him. Not for this world. But compared to Brandon Whitaker, heir to the Whitaker-Mercer empire, Wharton Business School graduate, Forbes 30 under 30, the man whose name opened every door in the country. Who was she? A woman from modest means. No inherited wealth. No Ivy League pedigree. No legacy to speak of. She knew she didn't belong in his world. She'd known it the moment she stepped into it. But she had hoped, foolishly, desperately, that love would be enough to bridge the gap. It wasn't. Tiana's fingers brushed the wine-soaked fabric. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that. But she felt it, the sting of being judged, of being measured against an impossible standard, and of always, always falling short. And in that moment, standing alone in the marble hallway of a mansion that would never be hers, Tiana Douglas made a decision. She wasn't going to be his punchline anymore. But to understand how Tiana ended up here, humiliated, betrayed, but not yet broken, you have to go back. Back to when she first met Brandon. Back to the glittering illusion she walked into, believing it was real. Back to the moment she ignored the first red flag and the second and the third. Because the engagement party wasn't the beginning of Brandon's cruelty. It was just the first time he performed it for an audience. Outside, the party limped forward like a wounded animal pretending to be whole. The orchestra resumed its waltz. Waiters circulated with fresh champagne. Conversations restarted in tight clusters across the lawn, voices deliberately bright, laughter deliberately loud. But something had shifted. The air felt heavier now, charged with unspoken questions and sideways glances. Brandon stood near the fountain, surrounded by his usual circle. Tech venture capitalists, trust fund heirs, influencers who treated proximity to wealth like a career. They laughed when he laughed, nodded when he spoke, validated every word that fell from his mouth. "Come on, it was harmless," Brandon said, swirling his fresh glass of wine with theatrical ease. "She knows I was joking. Tiana's tougher than she looks." "Classic Brandon," one of his friends said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Always keeping things interesting." "That's what I do," Brandon replied, flashing that practiced grin, the one that had landed him on magazine covers and conference stages. "Keep people on their toes." They laughed again, clinked glasses, moved on. But not everyone was buying it. Near the edge of the gardens, a cluster of older guests, board members, family friends, people who had known the Whittaker-Mercer family for decades, stood in quieter conversation. Their expressions were harder to read, their voices lower, their eyes sharper. "That was uncalled for," murmured Eleanor Hargrave, a silver-haired philanthropist who had attended every major Whittaker event for 30 years. "Agreed," said Richard Bowman, a former business partner of Brandon's late father. "There's confidence, and then there's cruelty. That boy doesn't seem to know the difference anymore." "He's always been entitled," Eleanor said, her tone edged with disappointment. "But this, publicly humiliating the woman he's about to marry? That's a new low, even for him." Richard sipped his scotch slowly, his gaze drifting toward the manor where Tiana had vanished. "I wonder if she'll go through with it." "Would you?" Eleanor asked. Richard said nothing. He didn't need to. Across the lawn, cameras still flashed. Phones still recorded. The night would live forever in digital memory, archived and analyzed, dissected and debated. Brandon didn't seem to care. He was too busy basking in the attention, mistaking infamy for influence. But the cracks were forming. Slowly, quietly, in the minds of people who mattered. Inside the manor, Tiana found refuge in the library. The room was massive, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with leather-bound books no one read, antique furniture arranged for aesthetic rather than comfort, a chandelier that cost more than most people's homes hanging above it all. It smelled like old wood and privilege. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to breathe. The silence was almost violent after the chaos outside. No laughter. No whispers. No flashing cameras. Just her and the weight of what had happened. Tiana crossed to the mirror mounted above the marble fireplace. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger. Hair still perfect. Makeup still flawless. But the dress told the whole story. Red wine stained across white silk like an open wound. She touched the fabric, fingers trembling. This isn't the first time he's made you feel small. The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome, undeniable. She thought back to 3 months ago, at a charity gala where she'd been introduced to a group of Brandon's colleagues. She'd mentioned her work with a non-profit supporting under-resourced communities, and one of the men had seemed genuinely interested. Brandon had interrupted with a laugh, saying, "Tiana's got a big heart. Someday she'll learn how the real world works." Everyone had chuckled. She'd forced a smile. But later, alone, she'd felt the sting. Then there was the time at his mother's brunch when Tiana had shared an idea for expanding the family foundation's reach. Brandon had patted her hand like she was a child and said, "That's sweet, but let's leave the strategy to people who've actually built something." His mother had changed the subject. Tiana had stayed quiet for the rest of the meal. And just last week, when she'd suggested he attend her mentorship program's graduation ceremony, he'd sighed and said, "Do I have to? Those things are always so earnest." She'd gone alone. Every jab had been wrapped in a smile. Every insult disguised as teasing. Every dismissal framed as honesty. And every time she'd told herself it didn't mean anything. That he was just stressed. That he loved her. But love didn't feel like this. Love didn't make you smaller. Tiana's reflection blurred as tears finally broke through. She wiped them away quickly, angry at herself for crying, angry at him for making her feel this way, angry at the world for watching and doing nothing. The door handle rattled gently. "Tiana." A voice. Deep. Calm. Familiar. She froze. "It's Andrew. Can I come in?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, quietly, she unlocked the door. Andrew Mercer stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. He held a small white towel in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He didn't smile. Didn't offer empty reassurances. Didn't tell her it wasn't that bad. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "I'm sorry." Something about those 2 words broke something else open inside her. "It's not your fault," she managed, voice barely steady. "I know," Andrew said. "But I'm still sorry you had to go through that." He handed her the towel. She took it, pressing it against the wine stain even though she knew it wouldn't help. "He thinks it was funny," Tiana said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "I know he does," Andrew replied. There was no defense in his voice. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. And everyone just laughed. Not everyone. She looked up at him. Andrew set the water glass on the side table and leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to respect. "You didn't deserve that," he said simply. Tiana's throat tightened. Then why did no one stop him? "Because people don't stop Brandon," Andrew said. "They never have. He's spent his whole life getting away with things because he's charming enough to make cruelty look like charisma." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her all night. She sank into one of the velvet chairs, exhausted. Andrew didn't move. He just stood there, steady and quiet, giving her space to fall apart without judgment. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "You don't have to decide tonight," Andrew said. But even as he said it, Tiana knew the truth. She'd already decided. She just didn't know it yet. Sitting in that library, staring at Andrew's quiet concern, Tiana's mind drifted backward. To before the wine. Before the humiliation. Before she knew what Brandon Whitaker really was. To when she still believed in fairy tales. 18 months earlier. The first time Brandon Whitaker walked into her life, Tiana Douglas had been volunteering at a youth mentorship gala in downtown Chicago. She wore a simple black dress from a department store, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her focus on making sure the kids from her program felt confident presenting their projects to potential donors. Brandon had been there as a keynote speaker. Young, magnetic, expensive suit tailored to perfection. He talked about giving back and creating opportunities with the kind of polish that only came from media training and generational wealth. The audience hung on every word. But when he stepped off the stage, he didn't head for the VIP reception. He walked straight to Tiana. "You're the one who built this program," he'd said, not as a question but as fact. She'd blinked, surprised he knew. "I'm one of many people who—" "Don't do that," he interrupted, but his smile was warm. "Don't diminish what you've done. These kids wouldn't be here without you." And just like that, he'd hooked her. Within a week, he'd invited her to dinner at a restaurant where reservations took 3 months. Within 2 weeks, they were flying to Napa Valley on his private jet. Within a month, photographers were snapping pictures of them at charity events, branding them as the power couple bridging worlds. It happened so fast. Too fast. But Tiana had been swept up in the current, thrilled by the attention, dizzy from the speed, convinced that this was what love felt like when it was real. Brandon was charming, attentive. He sent flowers to her office. He remembered small details. He introduced her to people whose names she'd only seen in magazines. He made her feel like she mattered in spaces where she'd always felt invisible. "You're my diamond in the rough," he'd told her one night over champagne on a rooftop overlooking the city. "You're real. Authentic. Everything this world isn't." She'd smiled, warmed by the compliment. At the time, it felt like he saw her. Really saw her. Later, she'd realize he was just cataloging her value. Tiana had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Southside Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. Her mother, Grace Douglas, had been a force. Tough, loving, and uncompromising about values. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than," Grace had told her more times than she could count. "Your worth isn't measured by your bank account or your last name. It's measured by how you treat people and what you stand for." Tiana had carried those words through scholarship applications, through sleepless nights in college working as a waitress while studying social work, through the years she spent building her mentorship program from nothing. She'd never had wealth, but she'd had purpose. And when Brandon looked at her with those sharp, confident eyes and told her she was special, she believed him. She believed he valued what she'd built, that he respected where she came from. She believed the lie. The cracks started small. At first, Brandon's introductions felt like pride. "This is Tiana. She runs an incredible nonprofit. Self-made, self-taught, completely inspiring." People would smile, shake her hand, ask polite questions. But then something shifted. At a gallery opening 3 months into their relationship, Tiana had been speaking with a prominent philanthropist about expanding mentorship programs into underserved rural areas. The woman was engaged, excited, scribbling notes. Brandon had appeared at Tiana's elbow, sliding an arm around her waist. "She's brilliant, isn't she?" he'd said to the philanthropist. "A little rough around the edges, but that's what makes her so refreshing." Rough around the edges. The philanthropist had laughed awkwardly. Tiana had frozen, unsure if she'd heard correctly. But Brandon had already moved on, steering her toward another conversation, another introduction, another performance. It happened again at a fundraiser dinner. Tiana had been discussing policy ideas with a city council member when Brandon interjected, "Tiana's got a good heart. Sometimes she gets a little idealistic, but that's why I'm here, to help her see how things really work." The council member had nodded politely. Tiana had felt her face flush. And again at his mother's holiday party, when Tiana mentioned her graduate thesis on economic mobility. Brandon had chuckled and said, "She's adorable when she talks about changing the world. I keep telling her, baby steps." Each time, the people around them laughed. Each time, Tiana smiled through the sting. Each time, she told herself she was overreacting. But she wasn't. The real shift came when Tiana started receiving attention on her own. A local magazine featured her program. Then a national news outlet picked up the story. Suddenly, she was being invited to panels, asked to speak at conferences, recognized at events not as Brandon Whitaker's girlfriend, but as Tiana Douglas, founder and director of a transformative youth initiative. She should have been proud. She was proud. But Brandon wasn't. "Another interview," he'd said one evening, scrolling through her emails on her laptop without asking. "Don't you think you're spreading yourself a little thin?" "It's important work," she'd replied carefully. "I'm not saying it's not," he'd said, tone light but eyes cold. "I'm just saying you don't want to come across as desperate for attention. People respect humility." She'd stared at him. "I'm not desperate. I'm sharing what I've built." "I know, babe. I'm just looking out for you." He'd kissed her forehead. "You're not used to this level of visibility. I am. Trust me on this." And because she'd wanted to trust him, she'd pulled back. Turned down interviews. Declined speaking opportunities. Made herself smaller so he could stay large. It wasn't love. It was calculation. Brandon had selected her because she made him look good, compassionate, grounded, connected to real people. But only if she stayed in her lane. Only if she remained the supporting character in his story. The moment she threatened to become the lead, he'd begun rewriting the script. Back in the library, Andrew's voice pulled her from the memory. "Tiana." She blinked, realizing she'd been staring at nothing for too long. "Sorry," she murmured. "I was just thinking." Andrew nodded slowly. He didn't push. Didn't pry. Just waited. And in that silence, something clicked into place. She'd spent 18 months shrinking herself for a man who had never seen her as an equal. Who had dressed up control as devotion and manipulation as care. Who had turned their relationship into a branding opportunity and her into an accessory. She'd ignored the red flags because the fairy tale had felt too good to question. But fairy tales weren't real. And Brandon Whitaker wasn't a prince. He was just a man with enough money to make cruelty look like charm. Tiana stood, setting the towel down, her jaw tight with newfound clarity. "I need to leave," she said quietly. Andrew straightened. "Now." "Soon," she corrected. "But yes. I can't stay here." For the first time all night, Andrew smiled. Just barely, just enough. "Good," he said. By sunrise, the world had already made its judgment. The photo appeared first on Instagram, a guest's carefully angled shot capturing the exact moment the wine hit Tiana's dress. Brandon's hand frozen mid-gesture, his smile sharp as a blade, her face a portrait of shock and humiliation. The caption read, "When your fiancé's toast becomes a roast." Yikes. #Whitaker engagement #awkward. Within 3 hours, it had 400,000 likes. Within 6 hours it was on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, TikTok. Memes spawned like wildfire. Side-by-side comparisons with movie scenes of public betrayal. Reaction videos with exaggerated gasps. Think pieces with headlines like "Red Flags We All Missed" and "When Love Looks Like Cruelty." Late-night hosts picked it up by Monday. "Folks, have you seen this engagement party disaster?" one comedian said, pulling up the photo on the screen behind him. "This guy literally threw wine on his fiancée and then told her she was making a scene. That's not a red flag, that's a red billboard with flashing lights that says, 'Run.'" The audience laughed. Applauded. Tiana watched the clip alone in her hotel room, stomach twisting. She'd become a spectacle. A punchline. A cautionary tale dissected by strangers who didn't know her name but knew her humiliation frame by frame. Some of the comments were supportive. She deserves so much better. I hope she leaves him. This is emotional abuse. But others were vicious. She knew what she signed up for. Gold digger gets what she gets. Why is she even surprised? Look at who she's marrying. Tiana closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a million eyes she'd never see. Brandon, meanwhile, was in damage control mode, or what he considered damage control. It was a joke that went wrong, he told a reporter outside his downtown office, flashing that trademark smile. Tiana knows I didn't mean anything by it. We laugh about it now, actually. People are so sensitive these days. The reporter pressed, but Mr. Whitaker, many are calling it humiliating. Some are even calling it abusive. Brandon's smile tightened. That's ridiculous. She's fine. We're fine. People just love drama. He posted a carefully crafted statement on Instagram later that day, accompanied by an old photo of him and Tiana laughing on a yacht. Love isn't perfect. Neither are engagement parties. Looking forward to moving past the noise with my beautiful fiancé. His PR team celebrated the post. His friends called to congratulate him on handling it well. At a private dinner that week, he clinked glasses with investors and said with a smirk, "Tiana's tougher than people think. She'll get over it. She always does." But Brandon had made one critical miscalculation. He assumed silence meant surrender. Tiana hadn't posted anything, hadn't released a statement, hadn't appeared in public since that night. She'd deleted her social media accounts within 48 hours of the party. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of it. Gone. The internet called it suspicious. Some speculated she was hiding. Others said Brandon had forced her offline. The truth was simpler. She needed to think without the noise. She moved into a boutique hotel under a friend's name, somewhere Brandon wouldn't think to look. She ignored his calls, his texts, his flowers delivered to her mentorship program office with cards that read, "Let's talk. I love you." Instead, she called someone else. "Ms. Douglas," the voice on the other end of the line said calmly. "This is attorney Rebecca Hahn. I understand you need representation." "I do," Tiana replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Walk me through everything." And she did. Every moment. Every jab. Every time he'd made her feel small. Every red flag she'd ignored. Every compromise she'd made. Every piece of herself she'd sacrificed. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When Tiana finished, there was a pause. "You know this is going to be public," Rebecca said. "I know. He'll spin it. His team will come after your credibility." "I know. And you still want to move forward?" Tiana exhaled slowly. "Yes. Then let's end this engagement on your terms." Over the next 2 weeks, Tiana moved like a ghost through Brandon's world. She returned to the penthouse only when she knew he'd be at the office. She packed her things methodically. Clothes, books, the few personal items she'd brought into his sterile, designer-furnished life. Her mother's jewelry. The framed photo of her and Grace. The notebooks where she'd sketched ideas for her mentorship program before Brandon had convinced her she was thinking too small. She left behind everything he'd given her. The dresses. The jewelry. The handbags with logos she couldn't pronounce. None of it had ever felt like hers anyway. Brandon didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care enough to ask. He was too busy telling his friends she'd come around. that she was dramatic but loyal, that she'd never actually leave. He was wrong. The press conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. No announcement. No advance warning. Just a simple media alert sent out 2 hours before, Tiana Douglas to make a statement regarding recent events. The room filled quickly. Reporters, cameras, producers scrambling to get position. Speculation ran wild. Was she defending Brandon? Apologizing? Confirming the engagement was still on? No one expected what happened next. At exactly 10 a.m., Tiana walked into the small hotel conference room wearing a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back, her expression calm and unshakable. No wine-stained dress. No tears. No trembling hands. She stepped to the microphone, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke. "My name is Tiana Douglas," she began, her voice clear and controlled. 2 weeks ago, at what was supposed to be my engagement party, I was publicly humiliated by the man I was planning to marry. Many of you saw the photo. Some of you made jokes. Some of you sent messages of support. I appreciate both in their own way, because they reminded me that people were watching. And if people were watching, then maybe my voice mattered too. The room was silent. Every camera locked on her. "I want to be clear about something," Tiana continued. "What happened that night was not an isolated incident. It was not a joke gone wrong. It was the culmination of 18 months of subtle disrespect, veiled insults, and emotional manipulation disguised as love. I ignored the red flags because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. But fairy tales don't make you feel small. Love doesn't require you to shrink. And partnership doesn't mean performing for someone else's approval." A few reporters leaned forward, pens racing across notebooks. "As of today, I am ending my engagement to Brandon Whitaker," Tiana said, steady and certain. "Not because of one moment, but because of a pattern I can no longer ignore. I deserve respect. I deserve dignity. And I deserve a partner who sees me as an equal, not as an accessory." She paused, letting the words settle. "I'm done being someone's diamond in the rough. I was never rough to begin with." And with that, Tiana Douglas stepped away from the microphone, walked out of the room, and left Brandon Whitaker's world behind. The internet exploded within minutes. And this time, Tiana wasn't the punchline. She was the headline. Brandon Whitaker, or Brandon Mercer as he'd recently begun insisting people call him, hungry to cement his connection to the family legacy, was in a board meeting when his phone started vibrating. Once. Twice. 10 times in 30 seconds. He ignored it at first, focused on presenting his pitch for a new tech acquisition. But then his assistant appeared in the doorway, face pale, gesturing urgently. Brandon excused himself, irritation flickering across his features. "What?" he hissed in the hallway. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed him her tablet. The headline screamed from every major news site. Tiana Douglas ends engagement, calls out pattern of disrespect. Below it, the video. Tiana at that microphone. Calm. Poised. Destroying him with every carefully chosen word. Brandon's jaw tightened as he watched. Then he laughed. Short, sharp, dismissive. "She's bluffing," he said, handing the tablet back. "She'll be back by the weekend begging me to take her back. This is just her playing victim for sympathy." His assistant said nothing, but the look in her eyes told him she didn't believe that. Neither did anyone else. The first crack appeared within hours. Brandon returned to his penthouse that evening expecting. What? Flowers. An apology. Tiana's things still scattered around as proof she hadn't really left. Instead, he found empty closets. Bare shelves. The space where her books had been gone. Her mother's photograph gone. Even the coffee mug she used every morning. Gone. She'd erased herself from his life as cleanly as a signature on a contract. Brandon poured himself a scotch and called his publicist. "We need to get ahead of this," he said, pacing. "Release a statement. Something about mutual respect, wishing her well moving forward." "Brandon," his publicist replied carefully, "I don't think that's going to work." "Why not?" "Because the public isn't on your side. The video has 20 million views. The comment sections are not favorable." "Then spin it," Brandon snapped. "That's your job." "I'm trying," she said. "But you threw wine on your fiancé at your own engagement party. On camera. That's not exactly spinnable." Brandon ended the call and threw his phone onto the couch. This was temporary. A blip. People had short memories. The news cycle would move on. Tiana would fade into obscurity, and he'd emerge unscathed. He was Brandon Mercer after all. Untouchable. Or so he thought. By the end of the week, the invitations started disappearing. A tech summit in San Francisco, suddenly at capacity. A charity gala hosted by one of the city's most prominent foundations. His RSVP lost in the system. A Forbes photo shoot he'd been scheduled for, postponed indefinitely. Then the corporate partnerships began unraveling. A sportswear brand quietly pulled his endorsement deal, citing shifting brand priorities. A venture capital firm he'd been courting for months stopped returning his calls. A major client of Mercer Holdings sent a terse email requesting a different point of contact for future dealings, preferably Andrew. Brandon's assistant delivered the news in his office, her voice measured and professional. "They specifically asked for Andrew?" Brandon repeated, disbelief sharpening his tone. "Yes, sir." "Why?" She hesitated. "They didn't provide details. But the email mentioned wanting someone with a steadier public image." Brandon's hand tightened around his pen. "That's ridiculous. I built that relationship." "I know, sir. But it didn't matter what he'd built. It mattered what he'd destroyed." The influencers came next. A lifestyle blogger with 3 million followers posted a video titled, "Why I'm No Longer Supporting Brandon Mercer." She spoke thoughtfully, carefully, but her message was clear. His behavior reflected values she couldn't endorse. A business podcaster dedicated an entire episode to dissecting toxic leadership and used Brandon's engagement party as the case study. Even a celebrity who'd once called Brandon a friend posted a cryptic Instagram story. "Humility isn't a weakness. Cruelty isn't strength." Brandon watched it all from his penthouse, scotch in hand, fury simmering beneath his carefully maintained exterior. They didn't understand. Tiana had made him look bad. She'd twisted the narrative, played the victim, manipulated public opinion. This wasn't his fault. It was hers. The board meeting happened 2 weeks after the press conference. Brandon walked into the Mercer Holdings conference room expecting the usual deference. Instead, he found something else. Cold assessment. His uncle, James Mercer, sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Board members lined both sides, their faces ranging from neutral to concerned. And at the far end, Andrew. Quiet. Observing. "Brandon," James began, folding his hands. "We need to discuss the recent developments." "If this is about Tiana, I've already addressed it," Brandon said, sliding into his seat with forced confidence. "It's a personal matter. It doesn't affect my work." "Except it does," said Carolyn Webb, the CFO. "We've lost 2 partnerships this month. Client confidence is wavering. And our public reputation has taken a hit that directly correlates with your personal conduct." Brandon's jaw clenched. "So you're blaming me for her press conference?" "We're holding you accountable for your actions," James said evenly. actions that were witnessed by hundreds of people and recorded for millions more. It was a joke. It wasn't funny, Andrew said quietly. The room went silent. Brandon's gaze snapped to his brother. What did you say? Andrew met his eyes without flinching. It wasn't funny, Brandon. It was cruel. And now the company is paying for it. You don't get to lecture me, Brandon shot back, voice tight with barely controlled rage. You've spent your entire life in the shadows while I've been the face of this family. I've built our profile. And you've damaged it, James interrupted. Which is why the board has decided to shift some of your responsibilities to Andrew. Effective immediately. Brandon froze. Excuse me. Client relations. Partnership negotiations. Public-facing initiatives. Carolyn listed. Andrew will take lead on these moving forward. You're sidelining me? Brandon's voice rose, disbelief bleeding into anger. Because of one bad news cycle? We're stabilizing the company, James said. This isn't personal, Brandon. It's business. But it was personal. And Brandon knew it. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. It's a correction, Andrew said, standing as well. For the first time, there was steel in his voice. One that's overdue. Brandon stared at his brother, the one who'd always stayed quiet, always stayed in the background, always played it safe, and saw something he hadn't expected. Strength. Authority. The kind that didn't need to humiliate anyone to prove itself. Brandon left the meeting without another word. That night, he called a tabloid journalist he'd used before for favorable coverage. I want to set the record straight, Brandon said, voice slick with manufactured sincerity. About Tiana. The article dropped 2 days later. Brandon Mercer speaks out. She wasn't ready for this world. In the piece, Brandon painted himself as the misunderstood partner who'd tried to elevate Tiana, only for her to crumble under pressure. He implied she lacked the sophistication for his lifestyle, suggested she'd used the press conference for attention. I loved her, he was quoted as saying. But love isn't enough when someone isn't equipped for the reality of this level of life. The article was shared, discussed, analyzed, and universally condemned. Social media erupted with backlash. Hashtag Team Tiana trended for 3 days. Op-eds dissected Brandon's arrogance. Former colleagues began quietly distancing themselves. And through it all, Tiana said nothing. She didn't need to. Brandon's own words were damning enough. His star, once brilliant and untouchable, was dimming. And in the shadows he'd once dismissed, Andrew Mercer was rising. The text arrived 3 days after Brandon's tabloid disaster. Tiana, it's Andrew. I hope it's okay that I'm reaching out. No pressure to respond. I just wanted you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who isn't trying to spin a narrative or gain something, I'm here. Tiana stared at the message for a long time, sitting in the small office of her mentorship program headquarters. Outside, life continued. Cars honking, people walking, the world spinning forward like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on something simple. Thank you, Andrew. That means more than you know. She hit send before she could overthink it. His reply came minutes later. Coffee sometime? No agenda. Just conversation. Tiana hesitated. Then, okay. They met at a quiet cafe in a neighborhood far from the usual haunts of high society. No paparazzi, no society columnists, no one who'd recognize them or care. Andrew arrived first, dressed casually in a gray sweater and jeans, looking nothing like the polished executive the board meetings demanded. He stood when Tiana entered, offering a small, genuine smile. Thanks for coming, he said. Thanks for not making this weird, she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. He laughed softly. I was worried I already had. They ordered coffee. Black for him, latte for her. For a few moments, they just sat there, letting the comfortable silence settle between them. The kind of silence that only exists between people who don't need to fill every second with words. How are you holding up? Andrew asked finally. Tiana considered the question. Better than I expected. Worse than I'd like. That's honest. I'm tired of lying, she said. Even polite lies. Andrew nodded, understanding in his eyes. For what it's worth, what you did at that press conference, that took courage. Or stupidity, Tiana said, though there was no bitterness in her voice. The jury's still out. It was courage, Andrew said firmly. Stupidity would have been staying silent. She studied him across the table. The way he listened without interrupting. The way he held space for her words without trying to fix or redirect them. It reminded her of something. We've had this kind of conversation before, she said quietly. Andrew's expression shifted, recognition flickering across his features. We have. 14 months earlier. The museum gala had been one of Tiana's first high society events with Brandon. She'd felt out of place, overwhelmed by the wealth and artifice, until she'd found herself standing alone in front of a Rodin sculpture, grateful for a moment to breathe. Beautiful, isn't it? She'd turned to find Andrew beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze on the marble figure. It is, she'd agreed. There's something about sculpture, Andrew had said thoughtfully. The way it captures motion in stillness. Makes you feel like time is irrelevant. Tiana had smiled. That's poetic for a businessman. Don't tell anyone, he'd replied with a grin. Ruins the image. They'd talked for 20 minutes, about art, about the gallery's new education initiative, about a book they'd both recently read on social entrepreneurship. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Brandon had appeared eventually, sliding an arm around Tiana's waist. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Just admiring the art, she'd said. Brandon had glanced at Andrew, something unreadable passing across his face. Andrew. Didn't realize you were interested in museums. I'm full of surprises, Andrew had said evenly. Brandon had steered Tiana away shortly after, his grip on her waist just a touch too tight. Later that night, in the car ride home, Brandon had said casually, You and Andrew seemed chatty. He was nice, Tiana had replied. We were just talking about the exhibit. Andrew's good at seeming nice, Brandon had said. But don't mistake politeness for interest. He's not the warm, approachable type. Trust me. At the time, Tiana had believed him. Now, sitting across from Andrew in this quiet cafe, she realized Brandon had been wrong. Or lying. Probably both. You were always kind to me, Tiana said, pulling herself back to the present. Even when Brandon. She trailed off, but Andrew understood. Even when Brandon made it clear he didn't like us talking, Andrew finished. Why did that bother him so much? Tiana asked. We were just having conversations. Andrew was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because you were equals when you talked to me. He couldn't control the narrative. Couldn't position himself as the one teaching you or elevating you. You were just you. And I think that threatened him. Tiana absorbed that. Did he say something to you? More than once, Andrew admitted. Told me to stop monopolizing you at events. Said you were uncomfortable around me, which I knew wasn't true, but I backed off anyway. I didn't want to cause problems. I wondered why you stopped talking to me, Tiana said softly. I'm sorry, Andrew said. I should have handled it differently. Should have trusted that you could make your own decisions about who you spoke to. You were trying to keep the peace. I was taking the easy way out, Andrew corrected. There's a difference. Tiana appreciated the honesty, the accountability. It was so different from Brandon's constant deflection, his refusal to ever admit fault. Why are you reaching out now? She asked. Why not just let me disappear? Andrew met her gaze directly. Because you deserve better than to disappear. Because I've watched you shrink yourself for months, and I hated it. And because... He paused, then continued with quiet conviction. Because I've always admired you, Tiana. Your work. Your values. The way you see the world. And I'm not reaching out to pursue anything or ask for anything. I just want you to know that someone sees you. Really sees you. Tiana felt something catch in her chest. Not the dizzying rush of Brandon's whirlwind romance, but something steadier. Deeper. Trust beginning to take root. I'm not ready for anything, she said carefully. If that's what you're thinking. I'm not, Andrew interrupted gently. I'm really not. I just want to be your friend. If you'll let me. She believed him. Over the following weeks, they met again. And again. Always in public but never performatively. Coffee shops. Museum exhibits. A quiet bookstore where they spent an hour debating the merits of different translations of 100 Years of Solitude. A community center where Tiana's mentorship program was hosting a workshop, and Andrew showed up, not as a donor seeking recognition, but as someone genuinely interested in the work. The media noticed, of course. Tiana Douglas spotted with Brandon's brother. What's really going on? Andrew Mercer steps out with ex-sister-in-law-to-be. Friendship or something more? The Mercer brother she should have chosen? Tiana ignored the headlines. Andrew did the same. When a reporter cornered Tiana outside her office one afternoon, shoving a microphone in her face. Are you and Andrew Mercer dating? She simply smiled and said, Andrew Mercer is a good man. That's all I have to say. Andrew, when asked the same question, replied, Tiana Douglas is an extraordinary person. I'm grateful to know her. Neither confirmed. Neither denied. And slowly, quietly, something genuine began to grow between them. Not built on spectacle or performance. Not rushed or dizzying or designed for cameras. Just two people seeing each other clearly. And for the first time in a long time, Tiana felt like she was standing on solid ground. In control. 6 months after the press conference, Tiana Douglas stood in front of a floor-length mirror in her new apartment. Smaller than Brandon's penthouse, but infinitely more hers, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, though she did. Because she looked like herself again. Her hair, once styled to Brandon's preferences, sleek, controlled, elegant, now fell in natural waves past her shoulders. She'd stopped straightening it, stopped fighting its texture, stopped trying to fit someone else's vision of polished perfection. Her wardrobe had shifted too. Less designer labels chosen for status. More pieces she actually loved. Today, tailored black trousers, a crisp white blouse, and a blazer in deep emerald that made her feel powerful without trying to prove anything. But the biggest change wasn't visible in the mirror. It was the foundation she'd built from the ground up. The Reclaim Foundation launched quietly on a Tuesday morning in March. No celebrity endorsements. No flashy PR campaign. Just a simple website, a mission statement Tiana had written herself at 2 a.m. on a night she couldn't sleep, and a promise. To support women escaping relationships where love has been weaponized, where emotional abuse hides behind luxury, and where walking away feels impossible. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, the website had 50,000 visits. Women reached out sharing their stories. Stories that mirrored Tiana's own. Stories of being diminished by partners who called it teasing. Of being isolated and told it was protection. Of being controlled and told it was love. Donations poured in from unexpected places. Small amounts from college students. Larger gifts from women who'd escaped their own diamond cages. Anonymous contributions from people who'd watched Tiana's press conference and finally found the courage to name what they'd been experiencing. Within 3 months, the Reclaim Foundation had funded emergency housing for 12 women leaving abusive relationships, launched a legal aid program, created workshops on financial independence and emotional recovery, partnered with therapists specializing in coercive control. Tiana worked 18-hour days, fueled by purpose and coffee, rebuilding herself one woman helped at a time. The interview requests started coming in. At first, Tiana hesitated. She'd had enough of cameras, enough of public scrutiny. But her lawyer, Rebecca, convinced her otherwise. "Your voice matters," Rebecca said. "Not just for you. For everyone who sees themselves in your story." So Tiana started saying yes. She appeared on a morning talk show, sitting across from a host who asked gently, "What made you realize you had to leave?" Tiana didn't name Brandon. She didn't need to. "I realized," she said, voice steady and clear, "that I was making myself smaller every day. That the person I was becoming in that relationship wasn't someone I recognized. And I had to ask myself, if my younger self could see me now, would she be proud?" The answer was no. And that's when I knew. The clip went viral. Not as a spectacle this time, but as a rallying cry. She did a podcast interview about recognizing emotional abuse in high-profile relationships. "It doesn't always look like violence," Tiana explained. "Sometimes it looks like jokes that cut. Like isolation disguised as exclusivity. Like being told you're too sensitive when you ask for basic respect. Abuse wears many masks. Wealth just makes the mask more expensive." She wrote an op-ed for a major publication titled "The Cost of Staying." "I stayed because leaving felt impossible," she wrote. "Not because I lacked courage, but because the world had convinced me that what I had was enviable. How do you walk away from what everyone else wants? How do you name abuse when it's wrapped in luxury? It took losing myself completely to realize that no amount of wealth is worth the price of your dignity." The piece was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Universities invited her to speak. Advocacy groups asked her to join panels. Organizations working on domestic violence awareness wanted her partnership. Tiana was becoming a voice. Not Brandon Whitaker's fiancé. Not a punchline. Not a cautionary tale. Just Tiana Douglas. Founder. Advocate. Survivor. The Women of Impact Award ceremony took place on a cool October evening at the city's historic Grand Theater. Tiana had been nominated in the Emerging Leader in Social Change category, a recognition she still couldn't quite believe was real. She'd bought a dress for the occasion, a floor-length gown in midnight blue, elegant but not extravagant, with clean lines and subtle strength. As her car pulled up to the venue, she saw the red carpet, the photographers, the lights. For a moment, her chest tightened with old anxiety. Memories of walking those same kinds of carpets with Brandon, always performing, always aware of his expectations. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was walking alone. And she was enough. She stepped out of the car, and the cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. But this time, they weren't asking about Brandon. They were asking about the Reclaim Foundation. About her work. About the women she'd helped. "Tiana, how does it feel to be nominated?" "Overwhelming," she answered honestly. "But mostly grateful. This nomination isn't just about me. It's about every woman who's found the courage to reclaim her life." Inside the theater, The air hummed with anticipation. Tiana found her seat, nodding politely to the other nominees around her. CEOs, activists, artists, entrepreneurs. Women who'd built legacies worth celebrating. And then she saw him. Front row, 3 seats from the center aisle, Andrew Mercer. He wasn't on the guest list she'd seen. She hadn't expected him. But there he was, dressed in a simple dark suit, not drawing attention to himself, not trying to be noticed. Just there. Supporting her. Their eyes met across the theater. He smiled, small, genuine, proud, and raised his hand in a subtle wave. Tiana felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not the dizzying rush of Brandon's attention, but something steadier. Something real. When they announced her category, Tiana's heart hammered. And the award for Emerging Leader in Social Change goes to... The envelope opened. A pause that felt eternal. Tiana Douglas. The theater erupted in applause. Tiana stood, legs trembling slightly, and made her way to the stage. The lights were bright, the crowd vast, but all she could think was, I earned this. Not because of who I was engaged to, but because of who I am. She took the glass award from the presenter, stepped to the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. And then, without planning to, she found Andrew in the front row. He was standing now, along with everyone else, applauding not out of obligation but out of genuine respect. Tiana spoke. 6 months ago, she began, voice clear and unwavering. I thought my life was over. I thought walking away from what everyone else wanted for me meant losing everything. But I learned something. Sometimes you have to lose the wrong thing to find the right path. The applause swelled. This award isn't just mine, Tiana continued. It belongs to every woman who's ever been told she's too much or not enough. To everyone who's walked away from what looked perfect but felt wrong. To anyone who's ever had to choose themselves when the world told them not to. She held the award up, let the light catch the glass. Thank you for seeing my work. Thank you for believing in second chances. And thank you for reminding me that my voice matters. As she walked off the stage, trophy in hand, she glanced once more at Andrew. He wasn't applauding anymore. He was just watching her. Eyes bright with something that looked a lot like pride. And for the first time in a long time, Tiana felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Building a legacy that was entirely, unapologetically hers. 1 year later. Time had taught Tiana Douglas something she'd never understood before. Love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning. It was supposed to feel like breathing. The year that passed between the award ceremony and the garden in Provence had been full of quiet, steady growth. The kind that didn't make headlines but built foundations strong enough to last. She and Andrew had traveled together. Not on private jets with photographers tracking their every move, but in ways that felt purposeful. They'd spent 2 weeks in Kenya visiting schools supported by the Reclaim Foundation's international expansion. They'd walked through markets in Marrakesh discussing microfinance initiatives. They'd sat in a small cafe in Vienna debating philosophy and laughing until their sides ached. They'd worked together too. Andrew had joined the Reclaim Foundation's advisory board, not as a figurehead but as an active participant. Reviewing budgets, connecting Tiana with potential partners, showing up to volunteer orientations when he could have been anywhere else. But mostly they'd just existed together. Movie nights where they fell asleep on the couch. Quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers. Conversations that lasted until 3 a.m. about everything and nothing. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was something better. It was real. Andrew had suggested Provence almost casually one evening over dinner. I have a meeting in Paris next month, he'd said. Thought I might stay a few extra days. There's this little village I've always wanted to visit. Lavender fields, old churches, nothing touristy. Would you want to come? Tiana had looked up from her pasta, studying his face for ulterior motives out of habit. But there were none. Just an invitation. A genuine one. I'd love that, she'd said. And so in late June, when the lavender was in full bloom and the air smelled like summer and possibility, they found themselves in a small village 2 hours from Paris where no one knew their names or their history. They stayed in a converted farmhouse with shuttered windows and stone walls that had stood for 200 years. They walked through fields of purple so vivid it looked painted. They ate bread and cheese on a blanket under ancient olive trees. They visited a tiny chapel where light filtered through stained glass and time felt irrelevant. On their third evening, Andrew suggested a walk through the garden behind their lodging. It's supposed to be beautiful at sunset, he said. Tiana agreed, slipping on a light cardigan over her sundress, completely unaware that everything was about to change. The garden was small but meticulously kept. Rose bushes in full bloom, winding paths of smooth stone, a fountain in the center where water trickled softly. The sun was beginning its descent, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. They walked in comfortable silence at first, fingers intertwined, no rush to be anywhere or become anything. Then Andrew stopped near a wrought iron bench beneath a canopy of wisteria. "Can we sit for a minute?" he asked. Of course. They sat, and Tiana noticed his hand trembling slightly. She'd never seen Andrew nervous before. Not in board meetings, not during interviews, not even when facing down Brandon's rage. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. Andrew laughed softly, running his free hand through his hair. "I'm terrified, actually." "Of what?" He turned to face her fully, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "Tiana," he began, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I've spent the last year watching you build something extraordinary. Not just the Reclaim Foundation, though that's incredible, but yourself. Watching you step into your power, your voice, your purpose. It's been the greatest privilege of my life." Tiana's heart began racing, though she didn't dare assume where this was going. "I've learned so much from you," Andrew continued. "About courage. About integrity. About what it means to choose yourself even when the world tells you not to. You've made me want to be better. Not because you demanded it, but because being around you makes me believe better is possible." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Tiana's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm not asking you to complete me," Andrew said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. An emerald surrounded by small diamonds, nothing ostentatious, nothing meant to broadcast wealth. Just beautiful. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world or change who you are or become someone you're not. I'm asking if I can stand beside you. As your partner. Your equal. Your husband." He took a breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Tiana Douglas, will you marry me?" The garden seemed to hold its breath. Even the fountain's trickle quieted, as if the world itself was waiting. Tiana looked at the man before her, the one who'd seen her at her lowest and never once tried to fix her, only supported her. The one who'd celebrated her victories without needing them to be his. The one who'd proven, day after day, month after month, that love didn't require diminishing someone else. She thought of Brandon, of wine-stained silk and public humiliation, of feeling small and controlled and lost. And then she looked at Andrew, at this quiet, steady man who made her feel like the most powerful version of herself, who'd never once needed to tear her down to build himself up. This wasn't about escaping one brother for another. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point or showing the world anything. This was about choosing partnership over performance, respect over spectacle. A man who understood that true strength meant standing beside someone, not above them. "Yes," Tiana said, tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, joyful tears, tears of someone who'd finally found what she'd been searching for. Yes, Andrew. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Not too tight, not too loose. Just right. Then he kissed her, soft and sure, while the sun set over the lavender fields and the world spun quietly forward into their future. Later that evening, sitting on their terrace with wine and stars overhead, Andrew said something Tiana would never forget. "I need you to know something," he said, holding her hand, thumb tracing circles over the ring. "I don't expect you to take my name. I don't expect you to change your work or your mission or your life. Whatever you want this marriage to look like, we'll build it together. Equal voice. Equal say." Tiana felt emotion well up again. "How did I get so lucky?" "You're not lucky," Andrew said firmly. "You chose yourself first. Everything else followed from that, including this." He was right. A year and a half ago, Tiana had walked away from a man who treated love like a transaction, who measured her worth against his ego, who needed her small so he could feel large. Now she was choosing a man who made her feel powerful simply by seeing her clearly, who believed her strength added to his rather than threatening it, who understood that the best partnerships weren't built on one person's glory but on two people's mutual respect. "I love you," Tiana said, the words feeling both weighty and effortless. "I love you too," Andrew replied. "Always have. Just took me a while to say it out loud." And in that quiet garden in Provence, with no cameras or crowds or expectations, Tiana Douglas said yes to a future that was finally, beautifully, entirely on her terms. Not because she needed saving, but because she'd already saved herself. And now she was ready to build something extraordinary with someone who'd been waiting patiently in the shadows, not to rescue her, but to stand beside her when she was ready. The second proposal wasn't about replacing the first. It was about rewriting the entire story. The invitation arrived in mailboxes across the city 6 weeks before the event, printed on heavy cream cardstock with elegant gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to an evening of reclamation, a fundraising gala benefiting the Reclaim Foundation hosted by Tiana Douglas Mercer Whitaker Estate Gardens." The location alone sent shockwaves through high society. "She's hosting it there?" Eleanor Hargrave had said to her husband over breakfast, reading the invitation with mixture of surprise and admiration. "Where, Brandon?" "I know," her husband replied. "That woman has steel in her spine." The RSVPs flooded in. Everyone wanted to witness it. The return, the reclamation, the woman who'd walked away from everything and built something even greater. The night arrived cool and clear, autumn settling over the estate in shades of gold and crimson. The same lawn where Tiana had once stood humiliated now glowed with tasteful lighting and elegant floral arrangements. White tents housed silent auction items, all donated, all carefully curated. The fountain where Brandon had posed with his smug grin now served as a backdrop for a photo opportunity benefiting the foundation. Even the string quartet played in the same spot, but the music felt different now, hopeful instead of hollow. Guests began arriving at 7. Society's elite, but also activists, non-profit leaders, survivors of abuse who'd found strength through Tiana's foundation, young women from her mentorship programs. A mixing of worlds that would have been unthinkable at the original engagement party. And then, at precisely 7:30, a sleek black car pulled up to the entrance. Tiana stepped out first. She wore a gown of deep ruby red, the color of wine, of blood, of courage, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that moved like water. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her grandmother's pearls, not diamonds from a jeweler Brandon had chosen, adorned her neck. And on her left hand, the emerald engagement ring and simple gold wedding band caught the light. But it wasn't the dress or the jewelry that made people stare. It was the way she carried herself. Head high, shoulders back, every step deliberate and sure. This was her estate now. Her event. Her night. Andrew emerged from the car behind her, offering his arm. He wore a classic black tuxedo, but there was nothing performative about his presence. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to support her. They walked the red carpet together, not ahead of her or behind her, but beside her. Partners in every sense of the word. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. Tiana, how does it feel to be back here? She paused, turned to the cameras, and smiled with quiet confidence. It feels like coming home. Not to what was, but to what is. What message do you want to send tonight? That transformation is possible, Tiana said simply. That dignity is non-negotiable. And that sometimes the places that held your pain can become the places that celebrate your power. The reporters scribbled frantically. Andrew squeezed her hand gently, an anchor, a reminder that she wasn't alone. They walked inside. The ballroom was transformed. Where there had once been champagne flutes and cruel whispers, there were now displays showcasing the foundation's work. Photos of women who'd rebuilt their lives, testimonials, impact statistics. The bar served signature cocktails named after virtues. Courage, resilience, reclamation. Guests mingled, voices buzzing with genuine conversation rather than performative small talk. Tiana moved through the crowd like water, greeting old acquaintances and new allies with equal grace. Eleanor Hargrave approached first, eyes misty. My dear, what you've done here. What you've built. It's extraordinary. Thank you, Eleanor, Tiana said warmly. Your donation to the foundation made so much of this possible. It's the least I could do, Eleanor replied. I should have done more that night. Should have said something. You're saying something now, Tiana said gently. That's what matters. Richard Bowman appeared next, extending his hand formally. Mrs. Mercer. Andrew. Congratulations on your marriage. And on this. He gestured to the event around them. This is leadership. Real leadership. Andrew shook his hand. She's remarkable, isn't she? Always was, Richard said, looking at Tiana with respect. Some of us just needed time to see it. And then, from across the room, Tiana felt it, a familiar presence, one that used to make her stomach drop. She turned. Brandon Mercer stood near the bar, drink in hand, surrounded by no one. His suit was expensive, his hair perfectly styled, but something about him had diminished. The swagger was gone. The easy charm had curdled into something bitter. He was watching her, not with desire or regret, but with something closer to disbelief. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, time folded back on itself, to wine-stained silk and public humiliation, to a man who'd needed to break her to feel powerful. Tiana held his gaze, didn't look away, didn't flinch. And then she did something he never expected. She nodded. Once. A simple acknowledgement. I see you. And I'm no longer afraid. Then she turned back to Andrew, to her guests, to her life, and Brandon became irrelevant. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, please welcome the founder and president of the Reclaim Foundation, Tiana Douglas Mercer. The applause was immediate and genuine. Not polite society clapping, but real appreciation. Tiana walked to the stage, Andrew watching from the front row, not standing in the spotlight with her, but present. Always present. She took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and spoke. 2 years ago, she began, voice clear and strong. I stood on this lawn. Same location, different night. And I experienced something I thought would destroy me. The room went silent. Everyone knew what she was talking about. Many had been there. I was humiliated. Publicly. Intentionally. In front of people I was supposed to call family and friends. She paused, let the words settle. And for a long time I thought that moment defined me. I thought it was the end of my story. Someone in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Brandon, perhaps. But it wasn't the end, Tiana continued, and now her voice gained strength. It was the beginning. Because sometimes the moment meant to break you is the one that wakes you up. The room seemed to lean forward. That night, I learned something crucial. My worth was never dependent on someone else's validation. My dignity was never theirs to take. And my future was never theirs to define. Applause rippled through the crowd, but Tiana raised a hand gently, not finished yet. The Reclaim Foundation exists because I'm not the only woman who's experienced this. Who's been told she's too much or not enough. Who's been diminished by someone who claimed to love her. Who's walked away from what looked perfect but felt wrong. She scanned the crowd, making eye contact with faces she recognized. Survivors, supporters, skeptics transformed into believers. Tonight isn't about revenge, Tiana said clearly. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming this space. Reclaiming our voices. Reclaiming our right to be seen, heard, and respected exactly as we are. The energy in the room shifted. Something electric, something powerful. So thank you, Tiana concluded, for being here, for believing in this work, for standing with women who are finding their way back to themselves, and for understanding that true power isn't about making others small. It's about helping everyone rise. The room erupted. Not polite applause. Not obligatory standing. But genuine, thunderous recognition. People rose to their feet. Eleanor and Richard, activists and CEOs, young women from her programs with tears streaming down their faces, donors who'd never met her but believed in her mission. Andrew stood too, hands pressed together, eyes bright with pride that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with witness. And in the back, near the bar, Brandon Mercer remained seated. Alone. Small. Watching the woman he'd tried to humiliate receive the recognition he'd always craved but never earned. He'd thought that night 2 years ago was his moment of power. That splashing wine and getting laughs made him dominant, important, unforgettable. He'd been right about one thing. The night was unforgettable. Just not in the way he'd imagined. Because he hadn't created a spectacle that elevated him. He'd created a catalyst that liberated her. And now, standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, Brandon finally understood what he'd lost. Not just Tiana, but the chance to witness who she was becoming. The chance to stand beside greatness instead of trying to diminish it. The chance to be loved by someone extraordinary. Not because she needed him, but because she chose him. He'd had all of that. And he'd thrown it away for a laugh. After the speeches, after the auction, after the donors had pledged over $2 million to the foundation, Tiana and Andrew stood alone in the garden where it had all begun. "You were incredible tonight," Andrew said softly. "We were incredible," Tiana corrected, taking his hand. The fairy lights still glowed overhead, but this time they illuminated something different. Not a performance. Not a facade. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of someone else's cruelty and built something real. "Do you regret it?" Andrew asked. "Coming back here?" Tiana looked around, at the lawn, the fountain, the spot where she'd once stood in wine-stained silk feeling like her world was ending. "No," she said finally. "I needed this. Needed to prove to myself that pain doesn't own the places it visits. That we can transform anything if we're brave enough." Andrew pulled her close, and they swayed gently to music only they could hear. And somewhere inside the ballroom, Brandon Mercer ordered another drink and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. The answer was simple, though he'd never understand it. He'd mistaken cruelty for power. And Tiana had discovered that the truest power was the kind that never needed to diminish anyone else to shine. The night they'd all remember wasn't the one where she fell. It was the one where she rose. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.